Hello and welcome to Threes to Wound. My name's Reese and today you're here for another tactical battle report. What's a tactical battle report, you might ask? Why is that different to a normal battle report? Well, it's just a little bit more tactically in depth. So we'll see a little bit more of my thought process from the perspective of my team throughout the game. Just so you know what strategies I'm thinking of using, how I'm thinking of playing the game, and all the random thoughts that'll go through my head throughout the game. Today we've got a great matchup. It's the Wyrmblade versus the Drukhari. Last week it was Death Guard Dan. This week it's Drukhari Dan. Changing teams to get into another team he's been using a little bit. Quite a gear change from the Death Guard as well, so we'll see how he goes. Before we kick off, I also just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who got involved with the last couple of tactical battle reports. Your likes, comments, engagement have all meant a whole bunch, but they've also helped, I think, to make the battle reports better. There'll be a small few changes you'll see in there, and most of that's come from community feedback. So don't be shy in telling me what you do like, what you don't like about these reports, because they're for you guys. They're for you guys to watch. So I want to make them as entertaining, as great as I can. The other thing that's super important, and this is going to sound a little bit lame, and you're probably already sick of hearing this, but please, if you can, like and subscribe as well. Follow along with the channel. Just short of 1,000 subscribers at the moment, and that is going to be a huge milestone for myself personally and the channel, and it goes a long way to helping take the next steps to keep growing it. This is obviously always a work in progress and something I'm wanting to do more, so just that little click does make a huge difference to me and my ability to be able to keep producing these videos. Well, that's enough of me groveling and sniveling. We're here to see some stuff blow up. We're here to roll some dice, so let's crack into the game. Today's mission was 3.1 Secure Architect. Now, this one has 6 objectives. You can see 4 along the center line there and then 2 closer to the deployment zones. Both deployment zones are along the longer edges of the boards, coming out square towards the center. There is a mission-specific action for this mission, and that is Disengage Tech. So an operative can perform this action while within triangle of a non-disengaged objective marker it controls. That objective marker is now disengaged. As well as that, you can also secure tech, which means using the pickup action, you can pick up and carry those objective markers. While you're doing that though, you do lose the ability to dash. To score points in this mission, each time you do disengage tech on one of those objectives, you score 1 victory point. And at the end of the battle, for each disengaged objective you control, you get 2 more victory points. For deployment, my opponent and I took it in turns placing different pieces of terrain down. We did have a little discussion before the game over what type of battlefield we'd like to use, and we really loved the Octarius terrain, so we used a lot of that. And we're really trying to create a lot of little alleyways and nooks and crannies for both teams to sort of have to wiggle their way through. We also wanted to make sure that we had interesting vantage points, so nothing that gave one side too much of an advantage over the other. Definitely no more vantage points in our deployment zones. We've definitely learnt that lesson from past games. And then also we just finished it off with lots of small scattered terrain just to give lots of operatives options on ways to move sneakily through the battlefield, as we feel like that's pretty thematic for both teams. For deployment, we rolled off, and lucky me or unlucky me, depending how I look at it, which is, well, in most cases, I hate picking my deployment zone just because I always feel like I'm going to make the wrong decision. I ended up choosing the blue deployment zone on that left-hand side of the battlefield there. The main reason being it just had a great vantage point looking over that central part of the battlefield, those 4 objectives, and I felt like I could get gunners up there pretty quickly and pretty early on. The other benefit was the way the terrain was set up, it kind of gave you a bit of a buffer for those objectives at the top and the bottom of the board. My plan here was, if possible, to run in, disengage them, grab them, and run them back behind that heavy cover on both sides. That seemed quite a good option to do if I could move faster than Drukhari, which is not always the best call, but I definitely thought if I could hold the center using the vantage points to overlook and control those middle objectives, I'd really be able to put pressure on those flanks. I was heading back to using the Wyrmblade today. These are a fantastic team and really starting to see them come into their own through a bit of tournament play. We saw them a lot at the Kill Team Open, and the cool thing was to watch a few players play them via the Kill Team stream, to be able to actually see players at the competitive level using them. I obviously don't consider myself a competitive player by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely love seeing how other people interpret the ways to use teams and the ways they maximize their benefits. Not knowing what the Drukhari were taking, I actually think Drukhari are one of the best compendium teams going around. And again, we've seen that with them making tournament finals, and in the hands of a very good player, they can be very dangerous. My friend Dan, or Drukhari Dan, as he'll be known today, was the player taken, and he's had a few games with them now. Probably still not his preferred team. He's probably played a lot more games with the Death Guard, but he's definitely making the switch very, very well to this team, and he's starting to find a lot of the dangerous synergies and combinations they have between the Witch and the Cabalite fire teams, and who to take in which situation. I was still trying to work out if he would be taking all Cabalites, all Witches, or a little bit of a combination. What was going to be the hard counter, or at least a counter for, I guess, my numbers and maneuverability. The biggest positive I had over them, I think, if he went full Cabalites, is the fact that he won't be able to shoot me that much. I don't consider the Wyrmblade necessarily an alpha strike team. I think they're like a beta strike team. They kind of use that first term to set up the board to how they want it. They stay out of danger, set themselves up, and then I feel in turn 2, or at least in every game I've played with them, turn 2 is usually absolutely devastating. Once they all reveal themselves, you get all those rerolls, you get all those stratagems you can use, the right tactical ploys. There's so much potential damage output you can do in that second turn. Where they seem to fall apart is when that fire starts to come back. So turns 3 and 4, if you didn't do the damage you need to do, sometimes you can really, really get hurt. I'm sure there's some teams that can really counter them quite hard in terms of their ability to hide and stay in cover. I think that maybe the Tau Pathfinders and some other teams like that who have lots of ignore, cover or ignore obscured and things like that would definitely be a good counter for these guys. But the Drukhari don't seem to have a whole bunch of those things. So my strategy here is to really grab those 2 flanks. I really want to have 2 flanking forces, possibly with characters out on those edges. Grab those middle objectives, hold the center using firepower and vantage points to make it that my opponent gets bogged down there and has to commit resources, and then slowly I'll put the squeeze on from those sides. If I can get those objectives safely back into my base, or even just put a unit on them, I'll be very, very happy, and then squeeze my opponent from there. And hopefully in that second turn after setting up the board, I can really put the hurt on the Drukhari. Let's take a quick look at which units I chose. First place to start is always with the leader. The Neophyte leader is a bit of an interesting character. He's got some good close combat options. Unfortunately, the only one I've got modeled at the moment has the Power Maul and the Bolt Pistol. Not a terrible combination, but I do have one in the works that's going to have the Chainsword for Ceaseless and also the Mastercrafted Auto Pistol, but that's for another game. In the meantime, this guy's got one job, and that's really just to help my mining laser or any units I'm going to use as snipers to use shadow vector. So basically being able to get back into cover once they take their shots. That's this guy's main objective. I'm going to hold him back, and then at the end of the game, if needed, he can push into the middle and use a bit of close combat prowess, hopefully just to finish off some wounded models or grab an objective late. Next up, it's the one and the only Space Cowboy, the Calamorph. He's in because, well, he's a really, really good model. Especially with the way this board's set up, there's lots of little smaller firing lanes. There's not too many long distance ones, so we're hopefully going to be able to rely on his short range profile the most, and that's where he's the most damaging. Also, especially against Drukhari, don't have amazing saves. 4 up on the Cabalites, 5 up invulnerable on the Witches. I mean, you're not really having to worry about using lots of AP weapon. This guy just shreds people with weight of fire and being really, really accurate. So that's his main strength, and that's going to be his job. I really want to use him as a bit of a scare tactic in the middle of the battlefield to make my opponent have to worry about something. The Locust is the next model, and he is very quickly becoming my favorite model on this team, and I didn't think that would be the case. I was really a huge fan of the Sanctus in the sniper variant, but especially on this battlefield, it was just too dense. I didn't think he was going to have as many opportunities to be as damaging as he could, and especially if my opponent played predominantly Witches, he was going to be in trouble very, very early on. So as a hard counter to that, I went the Locust because I just think there's few models that can mess up other models this as well as this guy can. He's so good. Once they charge in, he's got Duelist. When he charges, he's got Duelist. So the ability to take out your opponent's hits straight away, the ability to fight twice. There's a lot of really powerful combinations with this guy. Single-handedly, pretty much, he won the last game I played before this when I thought I was in dire straits and had very few models. 3 APL, lots of options, lots of things he can do. Even the barbed tail in a pinch can really be handy. So this guy is fast becoming an auto include. The Neophyte Heavy Gunners, you get the option to take 2 here, and let's not ask questions. The mining laser is always in there. You always take that. It's a fantastic weapon. It hits like a truck, and it's very, very consistent. The other one's a bit of a harder choice. I've taken the Heavy Stubber the last few games thinking maybe that was the option to go with, and I'm now less sure that that's true. The Seismic Cannon really suited this battlefield. Again, being a bit tighter in with where the opponent was going to be, especially if they were charging me. I thought having the long wave, short wave profiles was going to be really, really handy. And I'm interested to give this a bit more of a go because I think maybe I can turn it into something pretty powerful. Straight from last weekend's Bush Doof and carrying his Doof stick in hand, it's the Icon Bearer in next. This guy, as always, is a bit of an auto-include, but I'm definitely going to try and use him a little bit differently this time. In the past, I've sort of been sitting him with one of the Heavy Gunners, just, increasing their rerolls. This time I want to be a bit more aggressive with him and maybe push him up with the Locust on one of those flanks and use his ability as the Icon Bearer to take objectives away from my opponent, but also use Signal of the Strike to increase the abilities of the units around him, especially if I'm going to have smaller amounts of units on one of those flanks. He can be a bit of a force multiplier, so we'll see how that goes. He's got the shotgun as well because I think it's going to be up close. This is one of the times I didn't have too much trouble deciding between the Flamer and the Weber with which weapon I was going to take for the Gunner. The Flamer was definitely going to come in handy here, and I've been finding a good way to use the hide ability to get him into really dangerous spots early, especially when your opponent's hugging a lot of terrain, trying to stay out of range of your heavier weapons. They tend to bunch up, but then to be able to use the hide ability, jump out of cover with your Neophyte, grinning like a fool, firing off that Flamer, well, it's a good feeling. So the Flamer was straight in there. Also took the grenade launcher again, just for that duality. It's got the frag, got the crack, and again, another great candidate to use hide here. If you can get them to jump out of hiding and use those frag grenades into a group of bunched up enemies, well, it's a good day for you. The last guys into the team, 4 Neophyte Brood Adepts. Ideally, I'd like to actually equip these guys all with shotguns. I actually just don't have them modeled up. I've only got one painted ready to go, another one unpainted, and weirdly, no more, and I've got a lot of Neophytes, so I might have to do a bit of reconstructive work on a couple of them. I really want to concentrate today using these guys to take advantage of unquestioning loyalty. I feel like that's such a powerful strategy and such a great way to protect those elite operatives. So that's going to be these guys' main focus, bunching them up with those elites and keeping them alive. So basically encouraging nearly the enemy to charge me and then keeping a command point up my sleeve to then make them have to beat up the hapless Neophyte before they themselves get taken down. So that's the plan. For equipment, I wanted to keep it pretty simple. There's already a lot of rules to remember with this team, so I just wanted to do little things that would increase the effectiveness of some of my units. I gave both of my heavy gunners climbing equipment. Obviously just going to help them a lot with the terrain, moving around, getting to those vantage points quickly. To increase their survivability, I also gave them the Cult Talismans as well. I just feel like that's a great way to keep these guys alive in a clutch situation. To spend the last of the points, I just thought I'd put a bit of a sneaky surprise in there. On my shotgun Neophyte, I gave him a blasting charge, and I also gave him the Cult Knife just for a bit more close combat punch. This guy is going to be pushing up there, and I'm going to be using him as a little bit of a bodyguard model, so to have a few surprises up his sleeve that my opponent might not expect or might forget about could be the difference between weakening some units on the way in or actually killing some. Now to those damn Drukhari, and my opponent definitely surprised me here with the selection. He did end up going for the split fire teams here, so we've got one of Kabalites, which contains his leader, and then we've got another of 5 witches. One of the strengths of doing this combination is you can actually all of a sudden get 6 close combat guys by making your Cyberite into a close combat guy. You get your 5 witches, which still includes your special close combat weapons, but still lets you take a few pretty powerful guns. In this case, he was taking the blaster, which is always damaging, but he also was giving the splinter cannon a go for the first time in this setup. He's also using things like Agonites on these normal Kabalite warriors too, to make them a lot more efficient. This gives their regular splinter rifles relentless. So all of a sudden those are hitting really consistent and they're lethal 5 up. So their ability to do really consistent damage and turn from being probably more afterthoughts to actually quite damaging shooting operatives. I was definitely more thinking that I was going to be facing 10 witches here, because I know that ability for them to push up the board and get pressure on me was really, really hard to stop. And you know, they can be a bit of a a wave that once they hit you, even though you might get a few of them on the way in, once they're in your lines, you're definitely in a little bit of trouble. Hence why I took the Locust as a little bit of defense, and the shotguns as well. This list seems quite good though. This sort of gives you a little bit of the best of both worlds. It's still giving you those high power shooting weapons, so once my guys do reveal themselves, so maybe in turn 3 and 4, really being able to clean house with those, but also still giving you 6 close combat guys that are all very, very effective. The leader's also got a blaster pistol as well, so there's another real high damage weapon that if it gets a shot off, it's pretty much deleting a unit. So some very powerful guns there. Not to forget about the specialty close combat girls with things like Hydra gauntlets. You also got the shard net and impaler, so those things can really, really tie your guys up. The shard net especially being able to take away one of your attacks has me a little bit nervous for some of my special character guys, so I'll be doing my best to keep them at arm's length. Barricade placement was next, and I just used one to give me a little bit of cover on objective number 1. I also put one at that far side of the battlefield there just to give me a little bit of cover. I was hoping to be able to sneak up and use that to hide behind once I had the objective. My opponent did similar things, using one to cover the objective in the middle of his base. He also put one on that very top end of the battlefield there as well, just to give him a bit more cover when he moves around that heavy cover. Before we get to deployment, we should have a look at the tacops, and I've got to be honest, I battled a little bit with what to take for this battle. In the end, I decided on infiltration and obviously mixing in as well the Wyrmblade specific tacops as well. After shuffling around and dealing them out, the first one I ended up with was Nowhere Unreachable. And I actually liked this one for this setup. It seemed that my opponent was going to have to actually put it in a pretty achievable spot. And I was also going to be able to spread out and have a lot of units, especially pushing onto those flanks. If you put it in the middle, maybe there would be a little bit of difficulty, but I was confident if I could whittle him down, wherever he put it, I'd be able to get it eventually. So hopefully by the end of turning point 2, I could start to take advantage of that. The other two I took were Upload Viral Code and Sabotage. And again, these both really suited what I wanted to do with that flanking maneuver. There was heavy terrain that I could sabotage on both flanks there. There was also the possibility to have one unit be able to perform these across multiple actions. So as they move down the battlefield, sabotage those heavy pieces of terrain, and then also at the end up within Pentagon of my opponent's deployment zone and upload the viral code as well. There was a few different ways to get those, and I definitely felt like they were going to give me the best chance. I just wasn't that confident for some reason. This mission and the way the terrain was set up, I wasn't sure how it was going to play out. As a defender, I was deploying first, and I started by building my, Horns of the Bull on my right-hand side of the battlefield. So down the bottom there, I had the Seismic Cannon and 2 of the Neophytes positioned. The Seismic Cannon was in a position where I was planning to take advantage of the pre-game dash to get him in a bit more of a dangerous position. Where I'd set the Neophytes up to, it also gave them a little bit of utility. They could head to the middle in a pinch if they needed to, if I'd totally miscalculated or my opponent deployed in such a way that would throw me off. Otherwise, they'd be heading around that right-hand side of the battlefield. For their head of the bull, I had the mining laser and my leader. Now, their job was to move straight ahead and get up onto that vantage point straight away. Very simple. From there, overwatch the battlefield. The leader could counter-strike with close combat if anyone got too close, but he'd really just be there to support the mining laser. The Calamorph and his bodyguard were there as well. I had plans to move them straight into the middle using the Neophyte to hopefully disengage that first objective right at the front of my base. Completing the head of the bull as the final horn, I had my Locust, the Icon Bearer, and the Bodyguard Neophyte there with the shotgun and the blasting charge. Their job was to obviously pincer around that side or come around that side, but then also to really wrap up around and really put the squeeze on the Drukhari as well. So their job wasn't just to capture that objective, it was to capture it and then push around, whereas the other flank was probably more likely to capture the objective and hold position there. So we'd see if that was going to work. The Locust was also going to maybe make the Drukhari probably put some of their operatives out of position, or at least take them away from the center of the board, making it a little bit easier for me to cause a ruckus in there. Both gunner operatives also went into hiding to bring out at a later date to give the enemy a little bit of a surprise. I usually try to keep the models I've put in hiding as the last activation because they're a great reactionary force. You can really see what the opposition has done, and they're another asset, I guess, that helps the Wyrmblade be such a great counter-punching force. The Drukhari's setup definitely seemed to have some similarities to how mine was, so definitely deployed in, I guess, a bit of a counter On the lower end of the battlefield there was the 3 witches waiting. There was also the splinter cannon Cabalite in there, obviously looking to jump up on that vantage point as well to contest the middle. Then through the middle of the battlefield, that was where pretty much the rest of the Cabalites were distributed, putting those blasters and splinter rifles to good use overwatching through the middle of the battlefield. At the very top was where the last 2 witches went, and they're facing off against the Locust and my hard push up on that top edge of the battlefield. Pretty much a mirror of what I set up in a lot of ways, looking to fight heavily with gunfire through the middle and then pushing those flanks with those faster, more close-up units. So it's going to see who can get the advantage in those tussles, or if there's any feints or maneuvers to change what was the initial layout anyway. The final step before the game could kick off is, as always, the scouting phase, and this would determine the initiative as well. I ended up going with 3, which is Recon, to give my seismic cannon the free dash. My opponent chose Fortify to place an extra barrier down. He decided he actually didn't like one of his earlier placements of his barrier, so the extra one he thought that he placed down was going to come in handy a little bit later in the battle. That gave me the initiative going into the first turn. In the initiative phase of the first turning point, I decided to use Meticulous Plan to help me be able to disengage tech easier, especially having a lot of 2 APL operatives. This is a great one to use, especially early on. The only catch being, don't forget, you can only use it once per game. So I was hoping to get a lot of these objectives early and use this often. I'd also obviously spent the CP earlier for hide as well for my 2 units during deployment. To counter this, the Drukhari used Agile Gladiators. They really wanted to get those witch operatives moving as quick as possible down the battlefield. With tacops, we had to declare which ones we wanted to do. The Drukhari revealed central control and protect assets, so really showed there was going to be a lot of heavy fighting in the middle of the battlefield around those 4 central objectives. I also revealed my one, which was the Genestealer specific one, Nowhere Unreachable. So I had to give my opponent a token to place on the battlefield 6 inches away from their deployment zone. So they put that down towards that bottom part of the battlefield there. So kind of playing into my hands a little bit. I was wanting to push down that flank anyway. That also helps with some of my other tacops as well. So I definitely took this one as a win early on. The first official move of the game saw the mining laser use his climbing equipment to jump up onto that vantage point and start protecting the middle of the battlefield. The Drukhari, seeing this, obviously became very, very jealous, and the splinter cannon followed suit, jumping up to make sure that they had a gun overwatching the middle part of that battlefield as well. For me, a big part of this early game is all about trying to use my number of activations to force my opponent to reveal their hand a little bit and enable me to start counter-moving or counteracting to what they're doing. To this end, I always try to pick the maneuvers that I think I was going to do anyway and aren't really time sensitive. So I use my Neophyte leader here to jump up next to the mining laser, and I'll obviously be using Shadow Vector a bit later on to help the mining laser stay alive. Our favourite witch with the shard net, or as we like to call her, a net, thank you, headed into cover. Now that a net was snuggled into cover, it was the Calamorph's turn to move out. Once he moved through the door in front of him there, he was actually able to see the leader. He was firing on his long-range profile, so not amazing, but still not bad. Took the shots, and unfortunately no crits, so no AP, and not a whole bunch of hits. So it was a little bit of a fail, but it still sent a little bit of a warning to the Drukhari, but a lot of them being in engage mode were going to be targets for opportunities like that. After that, he then dashed into the middle to hold the middle of the ground, really daring the Drukhari to come up at him. They really need that center of the board for central control, and having him there was going to go a long way to denying that. To counter this, one of the witches headed to the oil rig in the middle to definitely put some pressure on him in the next turn. To help me keep luring the Drukhari out here, I used the GA2 on my next 2 Neophytes on that bottom end of the map there, pushing them both into cover. From here, they'd be able to push to that flank, or they'd be able to push to the middle if I needed a few extra bodies on there, maybe getting some cheeky shots off as well. The Hydra Gauntlet toting witch ran into the crate in the middle there, and from that position, she's obviously a threat to 2 of those objective markers, so I was obviously going to have to find a way to either lure her away from one of the objectives to get the other, or deal with her. After some quick measuring, it did appear a lot of the objectives were just that little bit further away because of terrain or positioning of some of my operatives having deployed a little bit further back in my deployment zone. I knew I was actually going to have a bit of trouble getting up to disengage a few of them, so I was now having to start setting up units for the next turn. The Icon Bearer copied the witch from the last turn and hid in the crate ahead of him as well. A Cabalite warrior bravely moved forward, snagging the objective just outside their deployment zone and booping the button to get them the first victory point of the game. He also got to take advantage of the snazzy double barricade that Drukhari Dan had built for him. Looks great. Now it was time to get a point of my own. I grabbed one of my bodyguard neophytes. He jumped out, booped the button, and then went forward, standing next to the Calamorph, the guy he's meant to be looking after. He definitely got left behind, but setting them up to hold the middle of the battlefield together and protect the Calamorph from any charges. With the GA2, I also grabbed the shotgun-toting neophyte, shuffling him in between the two containers there. This was sort of, again, a bit of a counter to where the witch was in the container ahead of him. If the witch went right, he could head that way. If they went left, he could head that way, offering support where needed. He also had the blasting charge as well, so something I might be able to use in the next turn to flush them out. Seeing me build up my forces on that side of the board obviously forced the Drukhari player's hand a little bit here. He sent a second witch into that cargo container and cover there to charge out in the next turn. After measuring a couple more times here, it did seem that the objectives were a little bit further out of my deployment zone than I realized. With hiding, you can only deploy your guys up to Pentagon outside of your deployment zone, and those objectives were sitting just outside of that range, so I'd really wasted meticulous plan a little bit here. It did also seem though like the Drukhari player was having the same issue. Their use of agile gladiators here at the start too didn't seem to be that effective. We were both struggling to get to those middle objectives, so I was going to have to start thinking of some workarounds to make sure I hadn't completely wasted that 1 CP. To achieve this, the first things first was to put the seismic cannon to work. I moved him around that heavy terrain there to get that bottom objective, which he promptly booped, and then sat in a pretty good position where he was obscured from the Drukhari heavy gunner up on the terrain there, thanks to the heavy cover he was behind, and I was pretty confident he should be able to hold that for a little bit before I could move him up and replace him on that objective with one of the neophytes behind him. To make sure he was safe, I'd even measured the charge distance of the witch behind the terrain there to make sure with agile gladiators that she couldn't reach him. The one thing I didn't account for though was her coming out and taking a pot shot at him. Now, although the witch's shooting generally isn't that great, they do still have lethal 5 up, and with a couple of really good critical rolls, plus me forgetting about the cult talisman, he was in a bit of trouble. In fact, he was in so much trouble, he was dead. At least he got me a victory point. With first blood going to the Drukhari, it was time for the Genestealer Cults to strike back. I revealed my first operative out of hiding, bringing the grenade launcher in to return fire on that witch who had so unceremoniously dispatched my seismic cannon. He opened fire and managed a massive 1 hit. He did 3 misses. I got the re-rolls, re-rolled 2 2s and turned them into 2 1s. So yeah, he's gonna have to take a good hard look at himself after this one. While the neophyte searched his soul to work out how it had all gone so wrong, on the other side of the battlefield, one of the Cabalites moved forward into some cover to give him a clear firing line onto objective 5, trying to keep my operatives away from it and give him a chance to snatch it next turn. In the biggest alpha move of the game so far, the Locust defied this Overwatch area and slid in behind the cover there, staying in conceal to hopefully nab that objective before the Drukhari can. I'd had a look at measuring and looking at the different ways to see if I could get to that objective. The benefit of the Locust having that APL 3 was I could move, dash, obviously also had meticulous plan in action, so it wasn't going to cost him the point, but most of the ways that I could get him there to within range to take that objective and disengage it, well, it was going to leave him very much in the open, so I decided to use the Locust as a bit of a deterrent for the next turn. While all eyes were on the Locust and what he was up to, the Drukhari leader took the opportunity to actually switch to the other side of the battlefield, or more so the center of the battlefield. He headed into cover along with the Shardnet Witch, so a little bit of close combat prowess building up in the center there. I'd been in 2 mines, or at least 2 mines, with what to do with my Flamer, who I had to bring in from hiding as my last activation. I still really couldn't find an effective spot that was going to help him get objectives, but I did notice that my opponent had bunched up 2 of his operatives right in the middle of his deployment, and I did find with a little bit of cheeky measuring that I could get them within the range and then take advantage of Torrent as well. So that's what I did. Once the smoke had cleared and the dice had been rolled, I'd managed to bring the witch down to 2 wounds and the Cabalite had 4 wounds left. Not quite as good as I was hoping. Some good armor saves had really helped both of those operatives, but I'm still pretty happy. That's probably the most effective use. He just may be in a bit of trouble now. The last move of the turn by the Drukhari was Spiteful Retaliation, which is very appropriate. The blaster shuffled a little bit around his cover, took aim at the flamer, and promptly obliterated him. Well, at least he got to shoot before he died. That brought us to the end of turning point 1 and taking us to turning point 2. The Drukhari managed to pick up 1 point for their tacop protect assets. Both the units they'd killed of mine were just within range of those objectives, so gave away a victory point there. Still think it was worth it. The flamer definitely went out in a blaze of glory. Pun intended. Overall, really happy with how things are shaping up so far in terms of where my units are. It's now all about getting the activation order right. That's going to help me have a hugely successful turn here. If I can get it right, I'm going to be able to hurt the Drukhari. A lot of them are already in engage mode, so they're already exposed. It's just about bringing my units out at the right time to get shots off and keep my weaker units safe. The 2 areas of concern though still were those flanks. The 2 witches that were hiding in the crate, I've really had to deal with them. If I could kill them, then that whole side of the board was mine and I could really start to turn that flank into my enemy and trap them. Him moving his leader into that position did surprise me a little bit. I was quite nervous about where he was initially. The Locust I know can handle a few of them. I've got those extra operatives there, but taking him away from the flank and pushing him into the middle definitely strengthens his abilities through the middle and now puts my Chalnath into a bit of danger, but I do have an idea with using a bit of terrain to keep him safe. Let's jump into the next turn and see how it goes. We rolled off for initiative. The Genestealer Cult took it again, so this is going to be a good start to the turn and hopefully can keep my Chalnath alive. As far as tacops went, I revealed that I had upload viral code and sabotage. So these were 2 great objectives to help encourage me to keep pushing down the board. As far as tactical ploys went, I held off here holding onto my CP. I definitely had some plans for that. They're very precious for the Genestealer Cult. My opponent once again went with Agile Gladiators to keep his witches zipping around the board. For the first move of the turn, I grabbed the Chalnath and I moved him around the left side of that terrain, basically taking him away from the witch with the shard net and the leader with the blast pistol, basically trying to put as much distance between them as I possibly could. The other benefit to doing this was he could actually see the Cabalite with the blaster as well, so I made sure that I took a shot at him, hoping to take him out, and was wanting to use my second round of shooting to take out the other Cabalite that was there. Unfortunately, due to the long range profile, I had to fire both times into the blaster just to make sure he was off the board. Definitely worth it though, because he's a hugely dangerous model. Once he'd done that, the way I'd position him also meant that he did still have a little bit of cover from the heavy terrain of the oil rig, and I spent the 1 CP to send him back into the shadows. The Drukhari wasted no time moving their very, very wounded witch onto that objective and disengaging it, getting another victory point. A smart move, that witch wasn't going to last much longer, and it was a great way to steal a VP before I could do anything about it. The only negative was it left one of the biggest moves of the game open to me, and I was very excited about this. After checking the distances a few times, it turns out my Locust could actually charge the 2 witches who are hiding in that cargo container. You might see in the photo there, you can't see the 2 witch models in there. They did both fit, but due to the magnets on their base and how light the models were, every time we got them to sit in there, they'd stick together. So just for the safety of the models and their little guns and extra hanging off bits, we took them out of there and just made sure we both knew that they were there. Once the Locust was in, it was absolute carnage, and he managed to dice up both of those operatives, including that's one of the witches with the Hydra gauntlets as well. So 2 really, really powerful models. He did take a bit of damage, but those extra abilities he's got, such as Duelist, went a long way to mitigating that damage and showed just how powerful he can be in the right situations. After dicing up those 2 operatives, the only catch was he was now stranded there and he had just the 2 wounds left. I was going to do everything in my power to keep him alive, but even if he did die, I definitely think he'd earned his points back right there. On the other flank, the witch took advantage of my grenade launcher's terrible shooting from the last turn and charged straight into him. Agile Gladiators really helped with that as well, pretty much meaning she could just do a straight line straight at him, and she promptly diced him. In response to this, it was time to get my neophytes involved. The neophyte with the shotgun was able to slide into some cover there, hurl his blasting charge from the safety of his new location, and promptly wipe that Cabalite off the board. For the second one, my other autogun toting neophyte in the middle there shuffled across and promptly blasted the witch off that objective. Couldn't stop her getting the victory points, but you know, I'm not above that kind of pettiness. The Drukhari responded with a Cabalite behind cover there, taking some shots at the shotgun. Luckily for him, he survived with 4 wounds left. It was time again for the neophytes to prove themselves using the GA2 here. Things like this really show how good GA2 can be. You really have a lot of options or a way to impact the game multiple times. In this case, one of my neophytes with the auto gun shot and killed the witch who charged the grenade launcher before moving up towards that objective on the flank. My other operative moved up just to the corner, staying in conceal to hopefully get some fire on that heavy gunner up on the terrain there in the next turn, or back up the other neophyte if he did die. It was Annette's time to shine here. She finally charged out of cover and killed the shotgun-toting neophyte that the Cabalite had failed to slay before. This was putting a lot of pressure on the middle now, and a operative I was really worried about, and now dangerously close to my Calomorph. I was going to have to think of some fancy finagling to keep him alive in the next turn. My icon bearer with his doof stick did some of his best work by sliding over and booping the button and disengaging that for 1 victory point. He was pretty isolated on that side of the battlefield now, and I didn't really need him to do much else except lock down that objective and hold on to it for the end of the game. I couldn't really even get him across to impact and save the locus in any way, shape or form. The best bet there was to make sure I got those 2 victory points. The Drukhari leader also charged out into the center of the battlefield. With a bit of fancy maneuvering, he managed to get in between the heavy terrain there and use his blast pistol to kill the autogun wielding neophyte. This was an interesting move because now we'd seen both Annette and the leader charge out. They'd taken out some operatives and put a little bit of control into the middle of the battlefield, but they were now both exposed to counterpunches, and 2 very good units had killed neophytes. So it was a bit of a win-win for me to have those neophytes dead, but now those models exposed in the middle, especially with some of the weapons I had looking into that area for the next turn. But why should I wait to the next turn when my mining laser's right there and can do away with that leader? Even with the advantage of cover he had there, he was no match for the mining laser, and he disappeared into a flash of laser beams and smoke. Once my mining laser had completed his dastardly deed of killing the leader, I then used my own leader's ability to put him back into the shadows as well, just to make sure he didn't get taken out by the Dark Elder heavy gunner. The Drukhari were really struggling for numbers now. Due to their low number of models, they were going to head into Overwatch, but I wasn't sure if there was much more they were going to be able to do to impact the scoreboard. Now that the heavy gunner didn't have the mining laser to shoot at, he had to switch targets. He did spy those 2 neophytes sneaking up on that flank and promptly took aim. Surprisingly, after a whole bunch of shots, he actually failed to kill the neophyte. He survived on 1 wound, definitely thanking his lucky stars. I thought I had put that neophyte into enough cover there, but using the dash, the gunner had been able to draw a line of sight and actually take away all cover, so very lucky on some rolls there for me. For the last activation for the Genestealer Cults this turn, I grabbed the leader and moved him into the center. Obviously, I couldn't use Unquestioning Loyalty with him, although it would have been great to protect my Calomorph, but he was another close combat guy that I could put in there, and this was what my plan was for him, to help grab objectives at the end and also join in on Ibanis that kicked off in the middle there. The Drukhari headed into Overwatch, and to no one's surprise, the Cabalite warrior aimed down his sights and finished off the Locust. He will be missed, still the MVP as far as I'm concerned in this game already. Killing those 2 witches was massive, so I'm sad, but I'm happy sad. That was the end of the turn, and for me, this turn epitomized what the Wyrmblade can do once they all reveal themselves. The ability of Cult Ambush to give you those rerolls when you're changing your engagement mode is fantastic. Things like Slink into Darkness are just huge as well for getting those units out into the battlefield, but then also back away safe before there can be retaliation. I don't feel like the Drukhari player did too much wrong. Maybe just not using enough of concealing their operatives. Having all of them in engage mode straight away meant that pretty much every time I wanted to shoot an operative, if I could position them, I could, and I was able to also protect my most valuable assets by then taking them away. I did need to keep in mind things like Slink into Darkness can only be used one time per operative as well. The next few turns is where the Wyrmblade can show their hand a little bit more. You start to run very, very low on CP. You've used a lot of their key strategies, and now all of a sudden you're not changing your unit's activation mode. And Retaliation Fire can really start to take its toll. In this case, luckily, there's 3 operatives left, so I'm not as worried about that. I think I'll be able to ride out these last few characters and then concentrate very heavily on grabbing those objectives. That's probably one of the things that's interesting as well with this team. A lot of the time I'd be a bit more heavily focused on my tacops and the main objective. This particular mission though is quite interesting because once you've disengaged the tech, you're not really having to worry about those main objectives until the end of the game. So now my big concern was just killing the enemy. If I could table them or get them down to 1 or 2 units by the end of the next turn, I was going to be able to do that without much trouble. We headed into turning point 3 and the Drukhari won the initiative, and this had me a little bit nervous because my poor Calamorph was definitely standing out there in a bit of trouble. Annette was one not to miss her opportunity and quickly charged straight into him. The ensuing combat was pretty close. I lost the one attack due to the shard net, which was really, really hurtful on a model I was already pretty worried about. But luckily for me, somehow the Calamorph survived with just 1 wound left. That was absolutely huge. I thought she was going to tear him apart. We'll have to see now how I deal with her. Since the Calamorph and Annette were tied up in combat, I knew that that wasn't a massive priority move. I had to think about the units that still had activations and what they could do and how they could impact the game. Since the Splinter Cannon had revealed itself on the top of that heavy terrain over there, I decided to bring my Mining Laser back into engage mode and wipe him out. The Mining Laser was definitely earning its coins today. He was definitely a close runner-up MVP to the Locust. With all the bodies around the objective there, the Drukhari player, a really smart move here, used his last Cabalite, instead of trying to go for blood or anything like that, moved him in to give them the ability to control that objective and boop the button to get the last victory point on that. That was the Drukhari's last possible activation here, with one of their operatives tied up in close combat. There wasn't really much else they could do. So now this was my chance to set myself up for the last turn to start grabbing all of those objectives, but also grab some of my tacops as well. The first thing I did was, well, I didn't concentrate on the objectives, but I got my leader to put a bolt round through that Cabalite's head. Well, I wanted that point, basically. With the Cabalite done, I used my Calamorph now. He fell back using 2 AP, and then when his final AP, he fired at Annette. And in a show of pure vengeance and rage and all around meanness, he absolutely annihilated her. Even with a really good counter roll with a command point, she was unable to save herself, but hey, it was a good try, and the Calamorph is a bad, bad cowboy. Man. While all that was happening in the middle, the banner bearer slowly wandered forward to get himself within Pentagon of the enemy deployment zone for the next turn. He was still also maintaining control of that objective as well, so good placement for him. There wasn't much happening on his side of the board. The last activation was my 2 neophytes on the other flank. I got one to sit on that objective to lock that down for the next turn, while the other one headed across and grabbed the nowhere unreachable tacop for another victory point. So that turn went pretty much to plan. Still very surprised I didn't lose the Calamorph. I thought Annette was definitely going to cut him down pretty quickly, but we already knew with the amount of models they had, the Drukhari were going to be hard up against it here. The score at the moment still 4-4, so it looks like it's a tight game. The only catch here is, unfortunately for the Drukhari player, he's got no more models on the board, so the next turn's just me doing some housekeeping. For the last turn, I just basically spent it moving all my operatives onto those objectives and got as many bodies on those as I could. That was going to bring my main objective score up to 12. I was also able to score the second point for nowhere unreachable, having that model on there, while my Icon Bearer also got me 1 victory point for upload viral code. Weirdly, the way it had panned out, I hadn't actually been able to take a maximum advantage of sabotage and upload viral code. Not that it was too important in this game, but still something to think about. My placement at the end of the game probably wasn't ideal. I probably could have scored that a bit easier if I had thought about it a little bit more in turn 3. Those objectives, both costing 2 AP to complete, does make them difficult, and they do require a little bit of forward planning, so I'll definitely have to have a bit of a think about that one for next time. That brought the final score to 15-4 for a huge win for the Genestealer Cult. Let's head back to me in the studio now for a little bit of a breakdown of the game. Thanks, Reese from the battlefield. Reese in the studio here now. Look, there's not too much to say about that game, but I'll go into it a little bit. I think I mentioned it earlier, that game was exactly what is so great about the Wyrmblade. Their ability to avoid and stay away from trouble for that first turn, to set them up for those hugely, hugely powerful second turns is their strength. And then obviously in the third and fourth, if they didn't hit quite hard enough, they can sometimes struggle. In this particular game, due to the Drukhari all being in engage mode, I think the terrain really helped me as well. That setup encouraged my guys to be able to hide. It held up some of their operatives, not the witches obviously with agile gladiators, but it did definitely support me. And then when I hit them, just like the Genestealer Cults, their armor saves aren't great. Looking at 4 ups and 5 ups. So getting that firepower on them, getting those operatives where I wanted and the fight on my terms definitely helped me win the game. The key part of the match for me though was definitely when that Locust got in and tore up those 2 witches in the cargo container. Although it was only 2 models, it was that whole flank effectively the Drukhari couldn't control anymore, and especially after they'd moved their leader away from that flank, it basically let me roll up around that side, which is exactly what I wanted to do. It also let me hold objectives on both sides of the map uncontested. For the Drukhari, the other thing that probably hurt them a little bit is they're not hugely suited for teams that are really, really good at staying hidden. They've got really powerful weapons, lots of AP, witches who are fantastic in close combat, but they don't have many abilities like the Wyrmblade or like the Tau or even veteran guardsmen who can actually bring operatives out of those positions or, you know, let you fire on operatives who are hiding. So that definitely hurt the Drukhari here, and that was definitely plain to see. They just couldn't shoot at anyone most of the time. The few times they did get to charge or they did get to shoot though, well, the proof was there. They absolutely annihilated who they were aiming at. So it was kind of lucky for the Wyrmblade that we were able to keep them hidden. The Drukhari player also did have some pretty rough rolls on their armor saves as well. I don't show all the dice rolls. I try to only show big key clutch ones or ones that are hilariously bad. He didn't have any really, really bad ones, but just consistently not great. And sometimes you can have those days where 5-up saves are landing left, right, and center, or even for him in close combat using agile gladiators, you do get that 4-up pretty much invulnerable save while in close combat, which is unreal. He had a really rough day with those. So landing a few more of those definitely could have changed how that match went, especially with that Locust. Well, I'm going to get out of your hair, guys. As I said at the start of the video, if you could please subscribe, like, join the comments, join the conversation below as well. Make sure you jump on my Instagram. Following along, joining in all those things is going to help us build a great community around this channel, and that's hugely important to me. It's not just about the games and the videos, it's about you guys getting involved and having a real impact on the games. Let me know as well. I need to know what teams you guys would love to see in the next match. What are the teams you think are a bit underrepresented? We know we've got some cool new stuff, Chaos Space Marines, Corsairs coming out. Don't worry, I'll be all over that by the time they land. But apart from that, yeah, jump in the comments, join the conversation. My name's Reese, and we'll see you next time.